What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Digest podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres, publisher and lead editor of Ducks Digest on Fan Nation, part of the Sports Illustrated Network. Oregon Ducks getting a big 31-24 win over Fresno State to kick off the 2021 season, that is. And I'm here with Ducks Digest reporter Dylan Mikkonen, who was on scene with me yesterday in the press box at Autzen. We want to break this one down and give you our thoughts and reaction. What does this mean for the Ducks moving forward? Tons of stuff to get into here. Dylan, how we doing, and what are some reactions that you have off top here?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It was great to be back in Autzen, especially with the fans in attendance for the first time in 644 days. I thought that the fans did bring the juice. It got quite loud at points, especially because it was a much closer game than any of us were expecting. I know the Ducks Digest predictions, we all thought it'd be a multi-score game, and I think rightfully so. It ended up not being that. Like you said, it was just a 7-point game. And overall, I feel like a lot of the sense around the program after the game was quite melancholy. A lot of people were really lukewarm as for the perception because, hey, they did win, but it was not convincing really at all. And the offense definitely was not impressive. But I think there's explanations for all of that. And overall, I'm just really excited for week 2 to have a real litmus test for them against Ohio State. But there's a lot to talk about from the game for sure.
Didn't turn out how they really envisioned it, but I'm sure there's some fans out there that are of the mentality, hey, a win's a win. I mean, after all the change that the program has seen in the offseason, maybe not all the change, but there were some departures, some new faces coming in. Adding Tim DeRuyter obviously was a big storyline, and the defense looked great at times and not so great at times. I think that was one of the big takeaways for me, even though the defense didn't look, as crisp as we maybe wanted it to in some regards. They did force 3 turnovers, which is huge. And 2 of them came in the first quarter, I believe. And we saw a lot of freshmen play, and they were great against the run. And, shutting down Ronnie Rivers was definitely a big key for them going into the game. And I think they executed on that real well.
Yeah, for sure. Also, I know a lot of people have mentioned, hey, they gave up 298 passing yards against Fresno State, which is a valid concern. From what I saw, a lot of that was just Fresno State was kind of picking on Triquez Bridges. And after the game, Mario Cristobal even said, yeah, I thought him and Manning played well, but there's also some reps they want back. Maybe they were playing a bit too soft when they should have been in press. And that's stuff that will be corrected in watching film. And also, I think it's quite likely that DJ James and Jamal Hill will be back for Ohio State just because Cristobal's never given us an actual timetable for their suspension. And it seems just no one's going to be shocked if their 2 starting cornerbacks are back for Ohio State and their suspension was for a Mountain West team. That's just how the sport goes, right or wrong. That's just nationwide how things are ran in this sport. Yeah, and I definitely, like you said, was quite impressed with their run defense, especially that first play they ran the ball and really got 1 or 2 yards. And I think that you can really look at this game as pre-Kayvon Thibodeau injury and post-Kayvon Thibodeau injury, because prior to Kayvon getting rolled up on, there really was a sense, at least for me, Oregon might win by 40. They were up 14-0. They had back-to-back defensive plays in which they got a forced fumble thanks to Noah Sewell and Kayvon Thibodeau. Really, Fresno State wasn't doing anything before Kayvon got hurt. And that's just because he's just a human cheat code that can get off the ball in a fraction of a second. That play in which Kayvon forced the fumble, I think I was tweeting about the previous play. I didn't even really see it. I just looked up and I saw the Fresno State quarterback Jake Hayner on his back and the ball fly out of his hands. I thought maybe it was Justin Flo for a second because we kept hearing all those statements from his teammates being there's going to be some cleats flying off when he hits people. Ended up being Kayvon, but Justin Flo did get some of those big hits, which was also nice to see. And I feel like when Kayvon is able to play and he's able to have that element where if you're not going to double team him, he is going to wreak havoc in that backfield. It's just a completely different Ducks defense. So I think judging the Ducks' performance after the injury is a little unfair considering they were missing their best player and they were missing two of their best cornerbacks who will not be giving up as many of those plays because they're just able to play tighter coverage. I thought DJ James in the spring game was very impressive when he was up against Devin Williams, who also did Devin Williams even play? I barely saw him.
I don't think he registered a catch. I barely saw him too. And I think a lot of that probably goes into, what people want to say about, maybe they're just, holding things back a little bit until the Ohio State game. But I'm gonna pull that up and double check. But either way, we barely saw him.
Yeah, and also Troy Franklin, I know, didn't have a catch, and he was listed as a starter in the depth chart, and he was not listed as a starter in the pregame introductions. But also, Cristobal mentioned that Troy, he's in the postgame, he mentioned Troy was limited. I'm assuming that means Troy Franklin. He probably got nicked up in the last 2 weeks. Oregon practice was not open these last 2 weeks, so all those injury reports were no longer going to happen because we weren't able to be on the field and see, okay, this person isn't playing. So, and also Cristobal mentioned that Justin Flo got nicked up like a week and a half ago, and he's still getting his feet under him, which that's scary for opposing offenses because he had 14 tackles, 5 solo, tackle for loss, forced fumble. And after the game, Justin Flo was like, yeah, I played okay. I feel like I can play a lot better. And I'm like, you had like the best. I know this wasn't Justin Flo's debut. He played like a snap or two against.
I mean, technically, it should have been.
Yeah, but for like all intensive purposes, this was his debut, and it was probably the best linebacker debut I've seen for an Oregon linebacker since Troy Dye against UC Davis in 2016. Which are some big shoes to fill, but I think Justin Flo can live up to that hype. Like he looked great, and you're going to need him and Noah Sewell to play like 5-star linebackers, like 2 of the best recruits this program has ever signed to hang with Ohio State next week. And I think, honestly, they can. They're both just insane athletic freaks who are being coached well by Tim DeRuyter, and I'm excited to see them grow this season.
A lot of really good stuff there. I think that's a really good point I really liked that you made was the pre and post injury to Kayvon, because you could see just how big of an impact that had. There just wasn't much of a pass rush at all when KT wasn't in. And you saw how, obviously how big of an impact that has on the defense. And then you have a lot of young guys that are getting, thrown in, and they're trying to kind of mix things up. I think that was kind of a hard challenge for the staff in this game is you want to win, but you also want to get some of these young guys some snaps before the big stage next week. A couple of guys that we saw get some meaningful reps. We saw Christian Williams getting a lot of work. Jake Shipley got some work as well. Also, Braden Swinson looked great, I think, especially after everything that we heard coming out of fall camp. So that's really valuable, but you kind of have to toe the line. It's like, okay, well, maybe we need to build a little bit more of a lead here before we make that call to get some of these younger guys in. And the same goes for the offense as well. But it seems like we're kind of focused on defense right now. Really liked what I saw out of Flo, obviously. And he was asked about his energy post game. I think Verone McKinley was asked about his energy too, and just saying that it leaks like and spreads all over the defense, and you can totally see that. God, hearing the Rory and Autzen was just so. It was like one of those moments like nature's healing. It was a little bit mixed because there was a lot of smoke, and we were kind of worried that the game wouldn't even happen. Talking about actual nature, but like even though it wasn't full. Man, Autzen just got roaring at times, and it was so great to be in that atmosphere. I was talking about Flo, and I think having that tandem with him and Sewell is just so exciting to look at because you can see that vision really coming to fruition. I think that both of them have some room to grow as far as coverage goes, for sure. And then, Flo kind of has to dial back his intensity. Saw that hit on Hainer, and we're really lucky that he didn't get tossed. I think they called it on Jaden Navarrete, who wasn't even in the game.
Yes, but yes, and it was also called just the late hit, which we both looked at each other and was like, "That's targeting." And because I even told you it happened with like less than a minute left in the first half. I said, "Oh, he's lucky that happened in the first half," because I thought he was about to be tossed, but that meant that he would be able to play all the game in Ohio State. If he had gotten targeted in the second half, he would have missed a half against Ohio State, which that would just be they're not going to win. I'm sorry. But
Yeah, that would have been really bad.
Yeah, no, he definitely has to dial back some of those really aggressive hits, but also him being aggressive is what got that forced fumble against Jake Haener later, which we both were like, oh, he's down. We weren't even like running to our keyboards to go tweet about it. And then we watched but then on the replay, I was like, oh, it looks like that was punched out, but also on the scoreboard at Autzen, it looked like the frame in which he punched it out was the frame his knee was down, and they just I don't think could overturn it because it was so close. And I was thinking they're really lucky these cameras are like 30 FPS and not 60 or like 120 FPS because I don't know if that was a clean forced fumble. I think it was just like right at that exact moment, but they couldn't overturn it, and that really was a difference in the game because Fresno State, I believe, still had the lead and the ball, and that was the play in which Oregon was able to tie it because they still didn't get in the end zone off that despite great field position. But our boy Camden Lewis, the starting place kicker, that's his spot. Washington State, now against Fresno State, middle, less than 30 yards, he's money. He was not money against Auburn in 2019, but that's okay. He's got it. He was 37 of 40 in fall camp, apparently, according to Mario Cristobal. We did not get any kicking questions to Mario Cristobal, probably because there was a lot more stuff to ask him than the kicking competition. But hey, Camden Lewis made all his kicks, and color me shocked, but hey, that's great.
Yeah,
I'm happy for him.
No doubt. That was definitely a good storyline to see after, he was kind of up and down in the past. Just because we're still maybe wrapping up a little bit on the defense, I know we have a lot we want to get into on the offensive end as well. We talked about Kayvon Thibodeau's injury. Another injury worth mentioning certainly is Drew Mathis's injury. He left the game. I believe it was still the first half when he got injured. Came back out with a crutch and street clothes. So Mario was talking about that injury after the game, and it seemed like from what he was saying, he never really gets super specific, especially when it looks like it's a little bit more of a serious injury, but it's looking like it might be more significant than Thibodeau's, which would make sense considering Thibodeau returned to action a little bit after he got hurt, and then they ultimately decided that his day was over. So two big injuries to keep an eye out on. I'm sure we'll get an update on both of those this week. And then just while we're talking about injuries, Mace Funa was also very in and out for much of the game. I believe I remember him getting looked at. I think it was his right leg. He didn't get asked. Mario and none of the players got asked about Funa's injury or kind of his status. But I think he had a really good game on that sack when Brandon Dorlus got it late in the game. Funa had the initial pressure coming off the edge, so. Looks like he came out and had a pretty good showing to get the season underway.
Yeah, and I don't want to speculate about injuries, but we saw him on the bike a lot. He was coming in and out. It's possible that it was just cramps because it was, fairly hot at some point. Alex Forsythe cramped up, and that was why he had to go down. So that wouldn't, I think, have been shocking. But he finished the game. I feel like Funa will likely be good to go unless it's one of those which doesn't hurt too bad, hurts later on. I'm sure we'll ask Cristobal on Monday and Wednesday about Funa's status, because also it's another very key defensive player. If he can't go for Ohio State, that greatly hurts Oregon's defense.
Yeah, you mentioned him finishing the game, and I think that's probably indicative of kind of where he's at. I just thought that was worth mentioning, and of what we saw while we were out there. And what else? I think we already talked about coverage with the backers, Bridges kind of getting picked on and his first significant chunk of playing time here. But yeah, the secondary kind of just looked lost at times. I feel like there were some pretty simple schematic things that Fresno State was doing to move the ball on them. I know like Braden Swinson, he looked pretty good, but he also had a play where he didn't set the edge very well, and they got that big run. And there was also some over penetration with the pass rush, and Haener was just running wild. It felt like not even like doing damage with his legs, but just extending plays. And then naturally, when that happens, then the secondary is not going to look as good because they have to adjust from their assignments, and the guys that they're guarding are improvising and working back to the ball. So it totally breaks down. but it all goes back to what we were saying about the pass rush and how important that's going to be for Kayvon Thibodeau to hopefully be available or somebody to step up and fill in that void should he not be able to go.
Yeah, I know we're both pretty big Brandon Dorlus believers.
Yes.
I think that he can definitely step up as the season goes on. I thought his coming out party was in the Pac-12 title game against USC, where, I mean, I was a beat reporter as well for Oregon last year at a different outlet. And when Brendan Dorlus was dominating that game, I just kept thinking, where has this been all year? The defense had been pushed around all year. And then, so I'm really excited to see Dorlus continue. He did get that big sack that ended up being honestly kind of the difference, because that's what gave Oregon the ball back and they were able to run the clock out. I think him, Funa, Thibodeau are going to be very key in just not next week, but the rest of the season. If they can create pressure off the edge and the defensive tackles are able to just clog their gaps, it's going to make this defense so much better.
Yeah, I like that he got moved to the outside. I think most Oregon fans kind of got introduced to him when he was working more so on the interior. So moving him outside looks like it'll really allow him to showcase that athleticism. And I think it also speaks to the confidence the coaching staff has at the depth that they've developed at the inside, on the inside, I should say, with Keon Ware-Hudson, Popo Amavai, Jason Jones, all in the mix there and getting good snaps yesterday in the first game of the season. What do you say? Should we talk some offense?
Yeah, let's do it. There is a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there certainly is. Let's just start with Anthony Brown. I feel like he's the talking point here that most people are focused on, especially with how late the decision came, with him being named QB1. He finished his day, I'm looking at the stats here, 15 of 24 with 172 yards passing for one touchdown to Johnny Johnson. And, man, he was active on the ground as well. He had 16 carries for 56 yards. And he had that rushing touchdown at the end of the game that ended up sealing the deal for Oregon. And that was a 30-yard touchdown, 3.5 yards per carry, sacked 3 times, and one of those was a strip sack that was a fumble that resulted in a fumble early in the fourth. But I think it was kind of a mixed bag for Brown. You know, we were talking to him after the game, and he wasn't acting too pleased with his performance. So, you know, his head seems like it's definitely in the right spot. But say what you will about maybe some of the decisions that he made, passing the ball. But I think he ran really well, and ultimately he was able to get the guys to rally around him and deliver when it mattered most. Yeah,
for sure. I think there are definitely lots of valid concerns coming out of Brown's performance from this game. There was some, but also I feel like sometimes his receivers just weren't getting open. I think Micah Pittman had some passes on his hands that probably should have been caught. They definitely weren't easy catches, but those catches would have extended drives and they didn't end up happening. Troy Franklin was obviously limited according to Mario Cristobal, and that was their starting X receiver. Devin Williams, I don't even know how much he played. I wasn't paying too close attention to which receivers were out there at points, because sometimes it was just like there's 11 people to watch on the field. That's stuff we're going to get more in a rewatch. I'll probably have to have my schedule for tomorrow. But I'm not leaving the game too concerned about Anthony Brown. I think he would have to play quite worse to get benched at this point. The Oregonians, Andrew Nemec, made a really good point on Twitter saying that the program's not going to want to throw Ty Thompson out there because they want to make that decision of who's going to be the long-term starter between him, Jay Butterfield, and Robbie Ashford as late as they could, because if they were to make that this year, the other one probably transfers out, and that greatly hurts your quarterback depth, which is, I think, a really good point. So I think I'd be pretty surprised if Anthony Brown gets benched at any point this season. And there were some throws that were very good. There was one throw I think it was the Oregon sideline to Johnny Johnson. I thought it was going to be a pick six when he threw it. It was not a pick six. It was perfectly thrown Johnny Johnson, and he ran up the sideline for a 32-yard gain. And also, it's just there's been a lot of talk online about whether or not they were just like not calling a lot of their money plays because they wanted to save those for Ohio State. I definitely think that's probably the case, considering they didn't even run an option play until the fourth quarter. Like when they ran their first option play, I was like, that's surprising. I feel like the option, especially with how good Anthony Brown can run, it's going to be a play that should be ran probably every offensive drive. And then when it was 4th and 2, they need to convert. If they don't convert that, they probably lose the game. They ran an option play rather than just running it up the middle, which is what they had done prior. So I definitely think on offense and defense, they were running a lot of vanilla stuff because they thought they could just out talent Fresno State, which almost didn't work, but they got the W. And hey, it can be a lot worse, as we can see with every other Pac 12 North team, because the Oregon was the only Pac 12 North team to win yesterday. The other 5 lost, including Washington and Montana, which is a little funny. But so it can be worse. And I do think that a lot of this game we can react to it in real time, but I think it's quite reasonable that they were holding a lot back because they want to give themselves the best chance to beat Ohio State. And if they also look really bad against Ohio State and in conference play, then we have a different conversation. But right now, I don't think it's panic time with the offense, despite it being very underwhelming. And I'm not going to argue that it was not underwhelming. It definitely was.
Yeah, it wasn't the best, showing, of course, after all the hype that we've heard. But all your points about it, being a little more vanilla, I think make a lot of sense. I really liked, that obviously it's a good play to highlight, but that touchdown pass to Johnny Johnson was great. Just seeing him go through his reads and then making that pass under duress was definitely something good that you want to see from your quarterback. And I really don't think that strip sack was his fault. If the offensive line's blocking better, that doesn't happen, which translates into my next talking point. I feel like it was kind of an up and down day for the offensive line. It's a little hard to, I think, evaluate this really easily, just because you see Anthony Brown getting sacked 3 times, but then you see the other side of it. They had 106 rushing yards, 3.8 yards per carry. So that there were up and down moments there. CJ Verdell had that one play on 4th down where he kind of stumbled and lost his footing, but I was watching the film before this, and that one kind of got blown up, and I don't think that it would have been a super good play even if he had his footing. But so that they started out pretty hot. Obviously getting those 2 scores was big, but there were definitely some times when they were just getting flat out beat. And they didn't get that much push, or I guess they looked better in the run game than in the pass game, I should say. Maybe that's my best way to kind of summarize the takeaways from that here. And that would obviously directly correlate with how Anthony Brown was able to do in the passing game. But another note, just because we're talking about the O-line, is we saw a lot of young guys rotating in. We saw Stephen Jones get a ton of work at right tackle, a spot that's usually held down by Saleh. Cristobal talking about how those guys are kind of neck and neck and looking like they're obviously confident enough to have those guys rotating in throughout the game. And we saw a lot of Dawson Jaramillo. He's someone who's, a local guy from the state of Oregon, which is always cool to see them doing well. Ryan Walk and Alex Forsythe being the other guys. That's a storyline I don't even think I ever thought about until now, just how much Oregon is actually represented on the starting offensive line or on the offensive line in general. But he did really well I believe he was in when CJ Verdell and the Ducks were driving the ball a little bit there late in the game, and he had some really nice blocks on the edge. So I think it's good that we're seeing young guys rotate in, but since it's so early, part of me kind of questions to what degree is that beneficial.
No, I would definitely agree, because so much of also playing offensive line is just knowing what everyone else is going to do and getting that chemistry. Because what the assignments are, especially if you're playing center. You're going to have to know all the assignments of what everyone does in the offensive line. But there's still just going to be like those minor inches, like that this guy pulls this way, this guard pulls this way, and you just need to get that camaraderie, which when you're all constantly rotating in and out, you're just not going to get. Last year, Oregon would rotate in and out constantly, which I thought was smart because of COVID. They didn't know who was going to be able to play. They kind of needed everyone to have that baseline level of competency. This year, I argue it might just be better if they were to say, hey, here are our 5 guys. They're the best 5 we have. and then we're going to have true backups at every position. When Alex Forsyth was cramping up, they put in Jackson Powers Johnson, who's a true freshman, who I actually thought performed very well in that drive. I was watching him because he was the new guy in. I wanted to see how he performed. And I'm not an offensive line expert or anything, but he never really got beat on any of his blocks, and he knew what he was doing. And I would be surprised if Oregon thinks that Jackson Powers Light is their sixth best offensive lineman, but he's the one that went in immediately because he's the backup center. There's always been all this talk from Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal about how they have like 10 quality starters on their offensive line group. Well, then everyone should have a true backup, and then if someone gets hurt mid-game, just put in their backup. You can figure out having your best five for that next game, but I think forcing everyone to become competent at every position means that they can't master the one that they are on the depth chart, which worries me for next week because they're going to be playing a much more talented defensive line against Ohio State. And if they're constantly rotating in and out, unless it's just a matter of, hey, we are running more tempo stuff this year, and these guys are just not conditioned well enough to play 80 snaps, then I get that. That's a different conversation, IMO. But I would like to see them just have a starting five, have everyone have a true backup. If that starter gets hurt, the backup goes in, and they figure it out for the next week rather than constantly rotating in and out. Unless they just see someone's playing poorly, then yeah, you can bench that person, put in their backup, see how it goes.
I definitely see your point about the true backup, idea. But I think, also Jackson Powers Johnson, I thought he did a good job. I was really excited to see him do well. He was a guy I talked to multiple times before he got to Oregon, and he's just a really great kid. Definitely, one of those culture, builders, those glue guys that you want to have in your program. So great to see him get some action, especially in the first game that he was eligible to play in. You would think, though, that part of that was probably at least in part due to Jonathan Dennis being injured. He wasn't available for that game, and I think we saw him walking around some of the pressers, and I think he was on crutches, and it looks like that one's a pretty significant injury. So hoping for the best for him. But other guys that are getting some run at center, Dawson Jaramillo is also another guy that has been getting snaps, and then they're starting to transition Marcus Harper into the center role a little bit. So I totally see what you mean. But when we were talking to Alex Mirabal kind of about that versatility, he was saying that he does that in part because you want to have a guy who's ready to play any position except for center, obviously, because that's the hardest one to learn. Because he was saying that when I was talking to him, these NFL teams, they only travel with so many linemen. So they got to have guys that can play, plug and play a variety of spots. So that's a little bit of a different situation at the college level. But he was saying that unless you're a starter, like a solidified starter, you're going to have to cross train and learn how to play different sides, different positions. So definitely a valid point, and that'd be something that I'd kind of be interested to ask him and Coach Cristobal, depending on how the offensive line progresses throughout the season.
For sure. And I also think that the line is going to get better throughout the year. I guess I was just expecting them to be able to dominate more at the line of scrimmage against the Mountain West team, considering the head coach is an offensive line guy. He's been the head coach since 2018. He, in theory, these are the players that he has recruited and worked with for years. And they didn't play poorly, but they didn't play to the standard that I think, expected of an Oregon offensive line.
Totally. And we talk about holding some stuff back potentially ahead of this Ohio State game. We didn't see any of the freshman backs, not a single one. And I think that's another thing to, maybe not read too much into, but I think it generates another level of excitement. I think I've been on some other podcasts and just talking a lot about the running back room throughout this build up to the season. And I think I've kind of tried to tip my cap in the Seven McGee camp. I think he's just going to be a super dynamic playmaker. We saw how effective Travis Dye was in this Moorhead offense. Didn't see as much of him on Saturday. He did have a rushing touchdown, so that was good to see. But I think things get really exciting when you can get guys like Seven in space. Hasn't learned too much slot based on the last time that I talked to him. We have a freshman focus story up on Ducks Digest for him that I wrote. That's been a really fun series, and if you haven't checked those out, you definitely should. But back to 7 in the running back situation, there's just so many like unknown guys, and there's a lot of hype around them that I'm excited to see them. But I also feel like they'll probably try to focus on maybe 1 or 2 against Ohio State, because they're gonna rely on Verdell and Dye the most, I would think. But seeing more freshmen getting play time, that's another thing we could talk about. We saw a lot of freshmen get snaps, true freshmen at that, on Saturday against Fresno State.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know that Franklin still played. I saw him out there. Dante Thornton played a good amount. I don't know if he had a catch. He may have had one, but he was out there for a lot of the snaps. He's definitely going to be one of their receivers that will be playing a lot. And I also enjoyed getting to see the play that the wide receivers were rotating in and out a lot. And also one more thing about the receiver room that I was quite happy to see is that Chris Hudson was able to get the start. And he was we were not able to watch any of fall camp last year. But whenever you talk to people about fall camp last year, they kept saying, "Oh, Chris Hudson's a dude. Chris Hudson's really good." And he never really broke out last year, but you could see that there was immense trust in him, because Tyler Shuck would throw him jump balls in the end zone. And he was able to come down with them, maybe because they weren't the best throws last year. But there was that trust. And whenever I'd seen him, like during practice or during the spring game, I was always really impressed by Chris Hudson. And clearly the coaching staff agrees, because they were able to get him to start this year. And I'm expecting a really big season from him. And just because of that depth in the wide receiver room, they are going to be rotating in and out. And they should be able to keep guys fresh, and not to what should be an advantage later on in games, because the opposing secondary, in theory, will not be rotating in and out as much as the Oregon receiver room will be, which should be, lead to more deep shots later in the third and fourth quarters, when the secondary may be a bit gassed. But I also think that they need to be able to take those shots. They took some. The pass to Johnny Johnson was, in the end zone, was a deep shot. That was like a 30-plus yard pass. They did throw it up. Like I think it was on 3rd and long. They threw it up to Chris Hudson, I think, on the far side, and he drew pass interference. It was either him or Micah Pittman. It was one of the two. Was able to draw pass interference that was able to extend a drive. But I think I'd like them to see them pass the ball downfield more often. A lot of it seemed like it was like dinking and dunking, which was not very effective, because Anthony Brown only led 2 scoring drives that were over 27 yards. And there was a third drive in which I think it was like a 60-plus yard drive, but then they got stuffed on 4th and 2 inside the red zone, and Fresno State was able to get the ball and turnover on down. So I also need to see more consistency in the passing game. But like you said about the freshman, I think that can help come, especially if they can just get Seven McGee in space. The program's been super high on him for years. They offered him when he was a freshman in high school, and he committed, and he's now here. What all I've seen of him, during practice, of what we've been allowed to watch, he's been very impressive. I don't know if he'll get as much run against Ohio State, just because there might be those true freshman jitters in that stage. Even D'Anthony Thomas is one of the best Oregon Ducks of all time. He fumbled twice against LSU in his true freshman debut. So I don't know how much run the true freshmen are going to be getting next week, unless they're just their best guys. But I do think, especially once we get into conference play, that Seven McGee and Byron Cardwell will be seeing a lot more run than yesterday.
Regardless of how this Ohio State matchup shakes out, it's nice to know that you have what should be on paper a toss-up against Stony Brook. Certainly a great opportunity to roll some of those true freshmen out and help them get their feet wet. You talked about the wide receivers. I definitely have heard the same things about Chris Hudson, and he's a guy from St. John Bosco, one of the best schools in the country for high school programs. That was a school I got to check out this summer. They have a really great thing going there, and he's a guy that I think should be breaking out this year. I think the wide receivers are definitely the group that I'm the most excited about, and really excited to see what Troy Franklin and Dante Thornton can do to get in the mix. And Isaiah Brevard looked really good in the scrimmage that we were able to go to during fall camp. But I think for the wide receivers to take a step forward, it's probably not a stretch to say that the quarterback play has to improve, but I think a lot of the reason that we're seeing maybe more dink and dunk stuff is that the wide receivers, they also need to do their part and get open. I mean, if they're getting the ball it's kind of a hard dynamic, right? You have the wide receiver has to run a good route to get open, and the quarterback has to put him on him at the right time. And so if I feel like we've seen that so much, especially last year, wide receivers would just catch the ball and someone's right there, and there's no opportunity to make a play after the catch. And this is arguably the most talented group of wide receivers the Ducks have had, and who knows how long. So I think that'll be something to watch here. How good are these routes that they're running, and how is Anthony Brown looking when he puts the ball on them, because that's a dynamic of this Oregon offense that has been severely lacking, and I'm sure is probably getting pretty frustrating for fans. Is like that's why they want to see the whole playbook. They want to see it open. They want to see the quarterback taking shots down the field, and I think that's just another part of it when we're kind of talking about what we want to see moving forward here following this Fresno State game that was relatively pedestrian.
I would completely agree with everything you said. I do think there's a lot of room for improvement, and I think as the playbook opens up, we'll hopefully see that improvement. I do think you can only have such a good offensive performance when everything is so vanilla that Fresno State's going to dare you to pass the ball. And the receivers weren't getting too open. I would like to see them run more drag routes. Like if you're going to dink and dunk, at least have it be stuff which there's a lot of run after the catch opportunities.
Exactly.
And I think they ran that once on third down and the ball was thrown behind Micah Pittman. But there was other times that Micah Pittman had back-to-back catches in the first quarter on quite a long drive and helped extend the chains a few times. I don't think the passing game is doomed by any stance, and I do think Anthony Brown is going to play better. But we'll just have to see it. But I have belief in the program. I'm just hoping that they become more aggressive offensively rather than – it seems like a lot of it is conservative, which makes it easier for a defense to target because then the defense can just play more aggressive, and they know that you're not going to take a deep shot behind them.
Totally. I think another part that I wanted to mention here when we're talking about the offense, a key stat that I think is going to be important to follow here as we track the evolution of Joe Moorhead's offense is the third down conversion. Oregon 7 for 16 yesterday in that opening game. Are you going to be able to keep the drives going? Because the defense was out there on the field for a long time yesterday, just throughout the game. And you don't want to be putting yourself in that position, especially if you're shorthanded next week. Like you got to keep the chains moving. And I think that's pretty much been a theme for the past couple of seasons here, is the defense being the strong suit of the program, which is kind of surprising when you think of how Oregon rose to relevance, especially during the Chip Kelly era. So it's going to be something to monitor. And then another part of the game that just kind of led to what was overall appearing to be an underwhelming effort was the penalties that Oregon had in this one. 8 penalties for 87 yards. That's a lot left on the field, but of course that's spread between offense and defense. So a lot to clean up. But I think overall, Dylan, when we're talking about this game, I hope this podcast will help put everything into perspective. You had that awesome piece that you wrote that's up on Ducks Digest that really goes in depth on that why fans, I think it's appropriate to, it's not appropriate to panic, but you can see why there's cause for concern after what we saw yesterday. So maybe exercise a little bit of caution more so.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely left, a lot less enthused about the Ohio State game leaving Autzen Stadium than I was heading in. Especially there was one point in the first quarter I was like, oh, this Oregon team is really good. And then they were down 3 points at home in the fourth quarter to Fresno State, which is not where you want to be at all. But also, I think we were able to see that the team has some mental fortitude. They got gut checked. They were losing 24-21 in the fourth quarter, and Fresno State had the ball. And how they responded after Verone McKinley roughed the passer in the end zone is that Justin Flo popped the ball out, got his offense the ball in great field position. The offense was not able to convert into a touchdown, but still got points, tied the ball game up. Then the Oregon defense got the ball back again, and Anthony Brown was able to execute a long scoring drive to give them the lead. And the playbook even opened up a little bit more during those last two drives. They started running option plays, which they weren't doing before. They did just enough to get the win. And at the end of the day, they got the win, and the season is not over. The season will be decided in conference play and at Ohio State. Last year, Iowa State really kind of demolished Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. Iowa State lost to Louisiana Lafayette to open last season, and still finished as a top 10 team. Iowa State this year beat Northern Iowa by 6 points. And they're still expected to be like a top 10 team in the country. These games happen. It's just about not losing them. Losing this game would have been disastrous. Being able to show that you can still get your work done and still be able to deliver a solid performance even when you're trailing at home in the fourth quarter. Obviously, you never want to be in that position, but I was glad to see that the team then was like, no, we have to step up. They stepped up. They got the dub. And I'm not that concerned about the team long term.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think that's a great way to put it, to kind of get people to calm down a little bit that maybe freaking out. I think there's one more area that we absolutely have to touch on in this podcast that I almost forgot about. The specialists, man. The specialists balled out. You talked about Camden Lewis doing really well, but I got to give a shout out to Tom Snee, because when the offense was stalling, in large part in the second half, early part of the second half, Snee was bailing them out time and time again and giving the defense a nice little start to the ensuing drive. Tom Snee, 5 punts, 234 yards total, averaging 46.8 yards a pop, long of 56 yards, and 4 of his 5 punts pinned them inside the 20. So that's huge when you're able to rely on a guy like that to go out there and help save the not save the day, but help the defense when the offense is not doing so hot. So shout out to Tom Snee. He really came out and helped the team in what ended up being a really close game. So I don't think you can overstate how big of a deal it was for them to get those big punts out of him.
Yeah, for sure. And that bodes well for the rest of the year, especially if the offense, let's say that the performance is going to be indicative of how the offense plays, how it's not going to be too creative. They'll be able to sustain some drives, but for the most part, the offense will be mediocre. Well, then that means the Ducks are going to have to win games on their defense and play the field position game a lot more than probably Duck fans want them to. But with Tom Snee, I feel that that's not a terrible route to take, because he was able to pin them inside the 20. Most of the Ducks drives where they scored were because they just started with great field position. And even that one punt that he got touchback on, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't his first punt like almost downed inside the 5 and it like barely hit?
Yeah, I think it was pretty close. They just hardly missed it. The Gunners were mobbing down there, and they were just a hair late. So it was awesome. So and shout out to Bobby Williams.
He played great. Yeah, shout out. Yeah, because last year the special teams was not the strong point of the Oregon Ducks, just to say the least. But the special teams played very well yesterday. And if all you ever have to say about the special teams is, hey, they did their job, perfect.
Exactly.
We want to talk about the special teams for a maximum of a minute a podcast.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, there was a lot of great stuff that we've kind of gotten into. I think we've kind of given a really nice overall rundown of the action from Oregon's season opener against Fresno State. Anything else you wanna add here, Dylan? I mean, we're going to be on the road heading to Columbus before we know it.
Yeah, we will. I know. I'm super excited to be at the Ohio State game. I remember when Oregon scheduled this game, I was in middle school. They were going to Ohio State. They scheduled it in 2010.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
I was like in 8th grade. Yeah, it was crazy. I was like, why are they scheduling the game for 2021? Well, it's finally 2021. Ohio State was not able to go to Autzen, but I'm very glad that this game was not rescheduled to be a neutral site game. I wanted to be able, just selfishly as a reporter and as like a Ducks graduate, I wanted to be able to go watch them in a true road game at Ohio State, because that's just awesome. That's what college football is about, is seeing these awesome football games. I've always wanted to go to an Ohio State game. No better excuse than when the Oregon Ducks are in town. And this is what the program's been leading up to for years, IMO, is these types of big games. This is going to be the biggest game Oregon's played since probably the Pac-12 championship game against Utah, maybe?
Or I've been saying since their last matchup, the national championship, in terms of just like the significance, I think, to the overall outlook of the program. When Cristobal and his staff are in people's homes, these top recruits' homes, they're going to either be selling their performance in the Ohio State game, or they're going to be, I'm not going to say running away from it, but you're just going to have so much more positive for it. That's why I think it's important for fans to be realistic heading into this one. And we are on the same page. I don't think we expect Oregon to win. Would love to be proven wrong. But if you can just keep this game competitive, it's going to be really good for the program moving forward. But we'll get into all that next week. We're still kind of in Fresno State mode, so we're like still covering this one, but we'll be shifting over to the Buckeyes preview before long here at Ducks Digest.
Yeah, no, so continue looking at the site. We're going to have a lot of great written content, a lot of great podcasting content this week. It's finally here. They're going to Ohio State. They're 1-0. They're the lone undefeated team in the Pac-12 North. This is what college football is about. Big games like this, and I can't wait.
Awesome stuff, Dylan. Well, before we get out of here, where can people find more of you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter. It's just my name, at Dylan Mickanen, DYLAN, I'll be writing for the Ducks Digest site. I'll probably be on a podcast this week, I assume, at some point. We're not sure about that, but I'm sure I'll be a podcast guest recurring. If not this week, just recurring throughout the season. I can't wait to continue providing more coverage, and yeah, just super stoked.
Yeah, it was a blast to have you and Scott with me at Autzen yesterday. I think it was just nice to have the whole team there, or some of the team members there. Just beefed up our coverage even more, and I think it went really well. So that was a blast. If you want to find more of me, we kindly ask that you subscribe to the YouTube channel. This is on the podcast right now, but it'll be on the YouTube channel as well. That's Oregon Football Max Torres. The channel's been growing pretty well, but spread the word. Give it. Let all your friends and family know about it. Other Duck fans. The support on the channel and all of our other social media channels at Ducks Digest on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Really, really important that we grow those accounts, because it lets us continue doing our thing, covering the Ducks and bringing you the content that you love. You can find me on Twitter at mtorresports. But I think we've said all we have for this one. It was a blast, and we're going to run it all back next week when Oregon heads to Columbus to take on Ohio State.